Hard Times by Charles Dickens, Book the Second, Reaping, Chapter 5, Men and Masters. "Well, Stevens," said Bounderby in his windy manner, "what's this I hear? What have these pests of the earth been doing to you? Come in and speak up." It was into the drawing-room that he was thus bidden. A tea-table was set out, and Mr. Bounderby's young wife and her brother and a great gentleman from London were present, to whom Stephen made his obeisance, closing the door and standing near it with his hat in his hand. "This is the man I was telling you about, Harthouse," said Mr. Bounderby. The gentleman he addressed, who was talking to Mrs. Bounderby on the sofa, got up, saying in an indolent way, "Oh, really?" and dawdled to the hearthrug where Mr. Bounderby stood. "Now," said Bounderby, "speak up." After the 4 days he had passed, this address fell rudely and discordantly on Stephen's ear. Besides being a rough handling of his wounded mind, it seemed to assume that he really was the self-interested deserter he had been called. "It were, sir," said Stephen, "as you were pleased to want with me." "Why, I have told you," returned Bounderby. "Speak up like a man, since you are a man, and tell us about yourself and this combination." "Wi' your pardon, sir," said Stephen Blackpool, "I hadn't naught to say about it." Mr. Bounderby, who was always more or less like a wind, finding something in his way here, began to blow at it directly. "Now look here, Harthouse," he said. "Here's a specimen of 'em. When this man was here once before, I warned this man against the mischievous strangers who are always about, and who ought to be hanged wherever they are found, and I told this man that he was going in the wrong direction. Now, would you believe it, that although they have put this mark upon him, he is such a slave to them still that he is afraid to open his lips about them?" "I said I have not to send, sir. Not as I was fearful of opening my lips." "You said, I know what you said. More than that, I know what you mean, you see. Not always the same thing, by the Lord Harry. Quite different things. You had better tell us at once that fellow Slackbridge is not in the town stirring up the people to mutiny, and that he is not a regular qualified leader of the people. That is a most confounded scoundrel. You had better tell us so at once. You can't deceive me. You want to tell us so. Why don't you?" "I am as sorry as you, sir. When the people's leaders is bad," said Stephen, shaking his head, "they tax such offers. Haply 'tis now the smallest of their misfortunes when they can get no better." The wind began to get boisterous. "Now you think this pretty well, Harthouse," said Mr. Bounderby. "You'll think this tolerably strong. You'll say, upon my soul, this is a tidy specimen of what my friends have to deal with. But this is nothing, sir. You shall hear me ask this man a question. Pray, Mr. Blackpool," wind springing up very fast, "may I take the liberty of asking you how it happens that you refuse to be in this constitution?" "How it happens?" "Ah," said Bounderby, with his thumbs in the arms of his coat, and jerking his head and shutting his eyes in confidence with the opposite wall. "How it happens?" "I'd liefer not come to it, sir, but sin you put the question, and not wanting to be ill-mannered, I'll answer. I ha' passed a promise." "Not to me, you know," said Bounderby, gusty weather with deceitful calms, one now prevailing. "Oh, no, sir, not to you. As for me, any consideration for me has just nothing at all to do with it," said Bounderby, still in confidence with the wall. "If only Josiah Bounderby of Coketown had been in question, you would have joined and made no bones about it." "Why, yes, sir, 'tis true." "Though he knows," said Mr. Bounderby, now blowing a gale, "that there are a set of rascals and rebels whom transportation is too good for. Now, Mr. Harthouse, you have been knocking about in the world some time. Did you ever meet with anything like that man out of this blessed country?" And Mr. Bounderby pointed him out for inspection with an angry finger. "Nay, ma'am," said Stephen Blackpool, staunchly protesting against the words that had been used, indistinctly addressing himself to Louisa after glancing at her face. "Not rebels, nor yet rascals. Now it's the kind, ma'am, now it's the kind. They've not done me a kindness, ma'am, as I know and feel, but there's not a dozen men among 'em, ma'am, a dozen, Not 6, but what believes as he has done his duty by the rest and by himself. God forbid, as I, that have known and had experience of these men all my life, I that hadn't and drunken with them, I that had ate and drunken with them, and seen them with them, and tooling with them, and loving them, should fall for to stand by him with the truth. Let 'em ha' done to me what they may. He spoke with the rugged earnestness of his place and character, deepened perhaps by a proud consciousness that he was faithful to his class under all their mistrust, but he fully remembered where he was, and did not even raise his voice. No, ma'am, no. They're true to one another, faithful to one another, affectionate to one another, e'en to death. Be poor among 'em, be sick among 'em, grieve among 'em, for only all the money causes that carries grief to the poor man's door, and they'll be tender with you, gentle with you, comfortable with you, Christian with you. Be sure of that, ma'am. They'd be riven to bits ere they'd ever be different. They'd be different. In short, said Mr. Bounderby, it's because they are so full of virtues that they have turned you adrift. Go through with it while you are about it. Out with it. How 'tis, ma'am, resumed Stephen, appearing still to find his natural refuge in Louisa's face, that what is best in us folk seems to turn us most to trouble and misfortune and mistake. I dunno, but 'tis so, I know 'tis, as I know the heavens is over me a hint of the smoke. We're patient, too, and wants in general to do right, and I cannot think the fault is all with us. Now, my friend, said Mr. Bounderby, whom he could not have exasperated more, quite unconscious of it though he was, than by seeming to appeal to anyone else, if you'll favour me with your attention for half a minute, I should like to have a word or two with you. You said just now that you had nothing to tell us about this business. You are quite sure of that before we go any further? Sir, I am quite sure on it. Here's a gentleman from London present. Mr. Bounderby made a backhanded point at Mr. James Harthouse with his thumb. A Parliament gentleman. I should like him to hear a short bit of dialogue between you and me, instead of taking the substance of it, for I know precious well beforehand what it will be. Nobody knows better than I do. Take notice, instead of receiving it on trust from my mouth. Stephen bent his head to the gentleman from London, and showed a rather more troubled mind than usual. He turned his eyes involuntarily to his former refuge, but at a look from that quarter, expensive, though instantaneous, he settled them on Mr. Bounderby's face. Now, what do you complain of? Asked Mr. Bounderby. I had not come here, sir, Stephen reminded him, to complain. I come for I was sent for. What? Repeated Mr. Bounderby, folding his arms. Do you people, in a general way, complain of? Stephen looked at him with some little irresolution for a moment, and then seemed to make up his mind. Sir, I were never good at showing out, though I have hadn't my share in feeling o' it. Indeed, we are in a muddle, sir. Look round town, so rich as 'tis, and see the numbers of people as has been brought into being here fur to weave, and to card, and to piece out a living, all at the same one way somehows twixt their cradles and their graves. Look how we live, and where we live, and in what numbers, and by what chances, and with what sameness, and look how the mills is always a-going, and how they never works us no nighter to any distant object, ceptin always death. Look how you considers of us, and writes of us, and talks of us, and goes up with your deputations to secretaries of state about us, and how you are always right, and how we are always wrong, and never had no reason in us to sin ever we were born. Look how this had growing and growing, Sir, bigger and bigger, broader and broader, harder and harder, for year to year, for generation under generation. Who can look on it, sir, and fairly tell a man 'tis not a muddle? Of course, said Mr. Bounderby. Now perhaps you'll let the gentleman know how you would set this muddle, as you are so fond of calling it, to rights. I don't know, sir. I cannot be expecting to it. 'Tis not me as should be looking to for that, sir. 'Tis them as is put o'er me, and o'er all the rest of us. What do they talk upon themselves, sir? If not to it, I'll tell you something toward it at any rate, returned Mr. Bounderby. We will make an example of half a dozen Slackbridges. We'll indict the blackguards for felony, and get 'em shipped off to penal settlements. Stephen gravely shook his head. Don't tell me we won't, man, said Mr. Bounderby, by this time blowing a hurricane, because we will, I tell you. Sir, returned Stephen, with a quiet confidence of absolute certainty, if you was to take 100 Slackbridges, all as there is, and all in number 10 times round, and was to sew 'em up in separate sacks, and sink 'em in the deepest ocean as were made ere ever dry land come to be, you'd leave the muddle just where 'tis. Mischievous strangers, said Stephen, with an anxious smile. Where have we not heern, I'm sure, sin ever we can call up to mind, or the mischievous strangers? 'Tis not by them the trouble's made, sir. 'Tis not with them to commences. I ha' no favour for 'em. I ha' no reason to favour 'em. But 'tis hopeless and useless to dream of taking them for their trade, instead of taking their trade for them. Ah, that's now about me, in this room. We're here afore I come, and we'll be here when I am gone. Put that clock aboard a ship, and pack it off to Norfolk Island, and the time will go on just the same. So 'tis with Slackbridge every bit. Revving for a moment his former refuge, he observed a cautionary moment in her eyes toward the door. Stepping back, he put his hand upon the lock. But he had not spoken out of his own will and desire, and he felt it in his heart, a noble return for his late injurious treatment, to be faithful to the last to those who had repudiated him. He stayed to finish what was in his mind. Sir, I cannot, with my little learning and my coming way, tell the gentleman what will better all this. Though some working men of this town could, above my powers, but I can tell him what I know will never do it. The strong hand will never do it. Victory and triumph will never do it. Agreeing for to make one side unnaturally allers, for every right, and t'other side unnaturally allers, and for always go wrong, and forever wrong, will never do it. Not letting alone will never do it. Let the thousands upon thousands alone, are leading the like lives, and often into like the muddle, and they will be as one, and you will be as another. We're black unpassable world betwixt you, just as long or short a time as sich like misery can last, not drawn nigh to folk with kindness and patience and cheery ways, that so draws nigh to one another in their money troubles, and so cherishes one another in their distresses with what they need themselves like. I humbly believe as no people the gentleman has seen in all his travels can beat, will never do till the sun turns to ice. Most are ratting 'em has so much power and regulating 'em as if they was figures in a soom, or machines without loves and likings, without memories and inclinations, without souls to weary and souls to hope, when all goes quiet, dragging on with 'em if they'd nowt the kind. And when all goes on quiet, reproaching 'em for their wants and for their want of sich humanly feelings in their dealings with you. This will never do it, sir, till God's work is unmade. Stephen stood, with the open door in his hand, waiting to know if anything more were expected of him. Just stop a moment, said Mr. Bounderby, excessively red in the face. I told you the last time you were here with a grievance that you had better turn about and come out of that. And I also told you, if you remember, that I was up to the Gold Spoon Lookout. I were not up to him myself, sir, I do assure you. Now it's clear to me, said Mr. Bounderby, that you are one of those chaps who have always got a grievance, and you go about sowing and raising crops. That's the business of your life, my friend. Stephen shook his head, mutely protesting that indeed he had other business to do for his life. You are such a waspish, rappish, ill-conditioned chap, you see, said Mr. Bounderby, that even your own union, the men who know you best, will have nothing to do with you. I never thought those fellows could be right in anything, but I tell you what, I so far go along with them for a novelty that I'll have nothing to do with you either. Stephen raised his eyes quickly to his face. You can finish off what you're at, said Mr. Bounderby with a meaning nod, and then go elsewhere. Sir, you know weel, said Stephen expressively, that if I cannot get work with you, I cannot get it elsewhere. The reply was, What I know, and what you know. I have no more to say about it. Stephen glanced at Louisa again, but her eyes were raised to his no more. Therefore, with a sigh, and saying barely above his breath, Heaven help us all in this world, he departed. And that is the end of chapter 5.